going to be building some new type of minesweepers to take care of the new technology.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's quite complicated, you know, the sweeping activity.
Uh-huh.
You know, you're okay as long as you don't run into one of those things.
Yeah. Today is October 21st, 2003. This is the beginning of an interview with Bill Gibson in the Chemung Valley Historical Museum at 415 East Water Street, Elmira, New York. John is 77 years old, having been born on December 14th, 1925. I am Rita Shapiro. Will you please state for the record the war in which you served?
World War II.
And what was your capacity? What did you do?
Line officer on board minesweeping ship.
What rank were you?
Lieutenant JG.
Okay. And did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted when I was 17.
Oh, really? Why?
Well, I can't remember. That was my age where you wanted to get in the action.
Mm-hmm. Were you allowed in at 17?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I didn't remember that. Oh, that's great. So where did you go first? Where did you have your basic training?
Well, I enlisted at the recruiting station, Naval recruiting station in Syracuse, New York. Mm-hmm. And I entered into the V-12 program, which was a training operation for future deck officers. Mm-hmm. And I was called up on the 1st of March 1944 and was assigned to the V-12 unit at St. Lawrence University, Canton, New York. And I was there for several months, three semesters. It was a trimester arrangement that was ongoing there. And I received the commission as ensign in the Naval Reserve, 6th of March, 1945.
Okay. Then you were in towards the end of the war.
Well, from 40, you know, the
You
end.
said you got it for 45.
Well, I enlisted when I was in 43.
I see.
In 43, and then when they called me up about a month after the interview that I had, then I went to the V-12 school.
Right. Is there anything that stands out about your time there? Your training,
Well, training was a very important aspect of Navy service. So I was able to, because of the fact you don't get a commission until you're 19, I was able to take several courses that were elective that I wouldn't have normally had in my curriculum.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, you got training and you got an education, college education at the same time? Well,
it was in addition to what I normally would have received. Mm-hmm. See, so yes. I took things like chemistry, geology, statics, mathematics. I'd already had some of those, but I took them over because I wanted to be sure I could get the best grade.
Yeah. What'd your family think about your enlisting?
Well, my father had been deceased since World War I, and my mother wasn't really happy. But I had a brother that had a medical problem, and he could not get into the service at the time. Mm-hmm. My mother, she had the same concern that all mothers did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you stay friendly with any of the people with whom you had your basic training and your original training? Did you serve with any of them afterwards? No, they went to the Four Winds. Mm. No, I did keep in touch with some of the people on the USS AM-59 Chickadee, but I believe the captain has passed away since then because it's been a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What did you enjoy about being in the Navy?
A good sense of loyalty and patriotism, because that's taught to you while you are busy with other activities, yes. And the camaraderie between other people on the same station.
Yes. Now, where did you go from after you finished the
V-12?
V-12 program.
I was sent to the General Line School in Hollywood, Florida for couple of months of recent training, and the instructors were people that just had come back from the combat zone, like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. So we were getting up-to-date news and up-to-date information pertaining to the development of the war, the pursuit of it.
And so, then how long were you then on this?
2 months.
2 months. And then where'd you go?
Then I went to Minecraft Training Center at the amphibious base, Little Creek, Virginia. So, because the amphibious portion of the fleet has all kinds of ships that are involved, from battleships, aircraft carriers, right down to small support ships, of course, destroyers and the like. Yeah.
Oh, very good. So you have a picture of a minesweeper here.
Yes,
where that you spent some time on. Would you show that to the camera? Would you tell us about this ship? This boat? What do they call them in the Navy? Ships?
They do. A boat is either a submarine or that marine vessel that can be carried aboard a ship.
I see. And this is a ship.
That is the ship.
Now, would you tell us about this ship? And
the Chickadee was a fleet-type minesweeper, 220 feet long, and she had a complement of 8 officers and approximately 120 enlisted personnel, sailors of all different rates. And she had a top speed of approximately 12 to 14 knots. They're built extra heavy with thicker than normal plates. That's the outside, the skin of the ship, to be able to withstand damage if you happen to detonate a mine and don't get sunk. She had diesel electric engines, twin screws, and she was pretty seaworthy. We had gone through some heavy weather.
I was going to say, did you see any action while you were on this boat?
Well, being on, I was not there when we were sweeping other than training. We were always training.
I see.
So as far as sweeping mines, the ship had gone through 2 or 3 years of sweeping. Okay.
So where were you after you left this for training? Where did you go?
Well, I was sent to the Norfolk Naval Station, where the ship was ordered there to have changes in armament, changes in radar, and to bring her up to specifications, more firepower, things like that.
And did you see any action actually, you yourself?
Well, sea duty is action, but it's not a battle. I was not in a sea battle. No.
But you traveled around a lot. Is that the point?
Yes. Yeah.
How was the food on board ship?
Not bad. I was lucky to eat in the officer's mess, so I didn't think it was too bad. The ship's cook was a baker by trade, so that worked out. I mean, there's always a lot of griping in the military about the food.
Yeah, you bet there is. But how about the men on board? Were they what type of men? What backgrounds did they have?
It would be a cross section of American manhood. Really, they were from all different states. Although most were from the East Coast, because the Norfolk shipyard was the base for Atlantic operations, Atlantic and European, whereas the Pacific Coast was really the base for the Japanese War.
The Pacific Theater, yeah. Let me see. I have to ask a lot of questions. Why did you choose the Navy?
Well, I didn't want to be drafted, and I didn't want to be in the Army because my experience with ROTC sort of made my mind up. That was the reason. And there were posters. I was going to Syracuse University full time, and and I had just made my mind up. You know, the posters were there to inform you about what the opportunities were.
Let me see. After you left here and you've been traveling around, how long were you on this ship actually, and on the other ship, the
Pheasant. The Pheasant.
That was the Pheasant, and then you're transferred to another.
Well, the first transfer, well, after the General Line and the Minecraft, I was transferred to the Chickadee. Okay.
And tell us about the Chickadee.
Well, I went through most of that, really. It was a good experience, I thought. I always felt loyal to it, you know.
Yes.
And I stayed in the reserve for
did you?
until 1961.
Oh, and what did you do there?
Well, I was assigned to some naval stations for Naval Reserve Officer training courses. And I went to Villanova and Delaware, those two Naval Reserve schools.
While you were out in the open seas or anything, were you in any ships, near any ships? I know you weren't in battle, but were you near any place that there were casualties or anything of that sort?
I wasn't, but there were casualties over in the Mediterranean on the Chickadee, and I had not come aboard there at that time. That was in the time of the invasion at Normandy. Okay.
Oh.
And there were a couple of ships in the squadron that were sunk.
You weren't in the invasion then?
No, I was not.
And then you came on board then after the invasion, and you were just, I assume
on board ship, and that's when the work in the Norfolk Navy Yard was being done. You have to go into dry dock, and the ship is supported, and all the water is taken out.
And what did you do in the meantime while the ship was in dry dock?
Well, you stand duty as officer of the deck, because you're still active, and the work has to be done. You have to keep the crews busy.
Doing what? Just
ship keeping, so to speak.
Yeah.
In other words, sweep down, sweeping. But there was a lot of painting to be done, you know, and also checking all the systems. So, because we were destined to go on overseas duty out of the West Coast, that would be San Pedro, California.
Oh,
that's the harbor of Los Angeles.
And did you get there?
Oh, we went down through the canal, and we were getting ready. Let's see, where else did we were sent up to on our way to Bremerton, where she was going to be put into mothballs. But then the orders were changed, and we stopped and went up the Columbia River to Portland to get some more work done. Be ready for the time trials. In other words, checking the ship out for all its capabilities. So we were doing that, running back and forth, and then they told us we were expected to go to the South China Sea, because there were still a lot of mines over there that wouldn't self-detonate. Our mines were self-detonating. They were the manufacturer was included saltwater washers that would dissolve after a period of time, and our mines would be unaffected. In other words, they would not go off. They would not detonate. But the Japanese mines, there was no such provision. So there were still sweeping mines many years after the Japanese war was finished.
That's very interesting. And dear, a question went right through my head. Did you tell us about setting the mines? I mean, tell us what your work was and how it was accomplished.
Well, there are several different types of mines and different types of defense against mines. The most commonly known type is a contact mine, which is a spherical thing, like a ball, and there were little projections from this sphere, and if they were hit with a ship, it would cause an electric circuit to start, and it would detonate the mine. That's the least complex. Then there were acoustic mines, which were activated by the sound of underwater noise, which could be submarines, engines and propellers, or battleship or other types. And our training was to be able to identify what the sounds were and to know how to set the mines for them.
What type of mines?
Well, that type was the contact. The other types were magnetic, and every ship has a magnetic field around it. And when you come into port, you get your magnetic fingerprint, so to speak, so that you know you are pretty much isolated from your ship being detonated because of the magnetic influence.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, it's kind of complicated. And then the Germans had several types of mines in the same carrier, so to speak. So you could sweep as many as a dozen sweeps back and forth, and it would take you maybe a dozen times before you would actually activate the detonator to have it go off. So you never knew.
So in other words, your job, the job of the minesweeper, was to go up and down in the waters, back and forth, and looking.
Well, being able to determine, you know, by the magnetic mines or by the contact mines, let's see, and the acoustic mines. They were the ones that, and they were the ones that were pretty effective too. Yeah.
So, and you kept going in the Atlantic first.
Yeah.
And you were up and down.
Yes.
And did you say you collected wine? Did you collect the mines? Did you bring them in onto the boat, or did you detonate them?
They would be detonated if they were.
If they were free.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
and you were free and free.
But I was thinking they would be detonated if they were cut loose. They'd come up and float. Well, then we would have one of the gunner's mates use a 50 caliber machine gun, and you stand off a long ways and hit that little projection. One of them that comes out from the ball of the contact mine, and it would detonate the mine, the surface mine. Yeah. They weren't the mines weren't placed very deep, less than 40 feet, because that's the draft of a battleship. So if you dropped it lower, why you wouldn't ever cut them loose? Yeah, and
So you kept collecting these. I mean,
well, we kept sweeping, you know, and the only place you swept were the channels, and that was very secret because the German submarines would come right in. And because there were many, you might recall, there were a lot of losses to shipping right along the Atlantic coast.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you see any come in contact with any submarines or German boats, or was it just the mines that you were looking for? We didn't. The Chickadee did not see any right then, at the time that I was on it, for a couple of years. But we did practice, you know, and we made sure you had to go back and check to make been cut loose and not seen. So there was activity all the time. And when we were at the naval station there at San Pedro, we had fire drills, and there basically there were a lot of firemen, fire chiefs that were in the services, and they're the ones that really and then of course they were in the Navy, and they were instructed so they could instruct everybody else how to fight engine fires, deck fires, whatever. So you're actually learning going into a concrete box room and having high octane gasoline on fire, and you go in there and suppress it.
So there was a lot of training.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Did you find much difference between the way it was done in the Atlantic as opposed to the Pacific Ocean?
No, except where I made this mention of the Japanese mines that were never really decontaminated, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
No, our procedure would be uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both sides.
Both
Yeah.
sides. Very interesting. What was a highlight in your time in the service?
Well, it was a satisfying experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
But there wasn't one thing that stuck out?
well, we had a go around with a hurricane down in the Caribbean there, and
Oh.
it was in 1944, and that's where the hurricanes were born, down in the Caribbean. And we were supposed to be going up to escort some freighters up along the coast, up towards north of Maine, Nova Scotia. Anyway, we had our due with this hurricane, and boats are very well designed, ships. And part of that is the ability to withstand the waves. And usually they will roll. When the water hits on one side of the ship, it causes it to roll left or right and comes back.
Mm.
And the experience that I had on that ship was we rolled 57 degrees off the vertical, which is pretty close to only 30 degrees off the horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
And she came back up.
Mm.
We were lucky. We were even destroyers and destroyer escorts, and sometimes cruisers were really damaged.
Damaged?
Yes, North Atlantic storms is as bad as a hurricane too.
Mm. That must have been. How about seasickness? Was there a lot of that in the?
Enough.
Mm-hmm.
Even the dog we had as a mascot, we felt sorry for him because he was everybody's pet.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure.
And yes, people would get seasick,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Sure.
But that's after you've been out there a few days, and you get past it.
Yeah,
Right.
past that, yeah. So in other words, you were escorting even during the hurricane. You were escorting ships and making
Yeah.
sure that they were.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you've got to stay away from other ships, and try to be able to control the ship from sinking.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So,
It must have been a very interesting experience.
well, it's exciting and it's
Mm-hmm.
scary.
Yes, I'm sure.
I mean, anybody
Now,
that
did you
says,
have any typhoons or anything out in the Pacific?
not that I was on, but they happen there. They have
Mhm.
what you call a tsunami, which is a
Yeah.
sea level. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Mhm.
And there were a few ships lost there,
Yeah.
but I wasn't over in there. Only just off the coast a little bit.
Yeah.
Doing
So that must have been very exciting.
it was.
Duty.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't-
Scary.
Well, you can't serve hot food. The
Mhm.
cooks have to make up sandwiches,
Right.
things like that, and you've got to be very concerned nobody gets exposed, gets washed overboard,
Mm-hmm.
which can happen.
Yeah.
You got to keep everything running.
Now, we've given your highlight possibly. What was the worst time?
I don't know that I ever considered there was a worse time, really. Not really.
Mm-hmm. Did your experience in your war service have any influence on the way you lived your life and what happened to you afterwards?
Well, I stayed in the reserve.
Yeah, you stayed in the reserve. But, I mean, anything happened within you personally? I mean, was there any change in you personally?
Well, I can't say I stopped drinking. I mean, I never really,
Yeah.
used alcohol.
Yeah.
I was.
Well, that's
I was
part
still
of being
only
in the
17,
Mm-hmm.
when I went in, and
Yeah.
18. So, but
What was your feeling about the war in itself?
well, we always felt that we were the ones that were attacked. But all the books have been written since then, you could talk forever and really never come to a conclusion as to who was right, who was wrong, and all that. So, but at the time, you feel that they're the aggressor, and you feel like you want to do them in. Otherwise, you would lose the homeland.
Right. And you felt then that it was a just war?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, me too. Did you feel that the war changed you in any way?
No, not really a lot. I think you get a good understanding of disciplinary actions, either that you've experienced or that other people on board ship, you know, or a naval station experienced. And I think that carried over because I went back on a year and a half of college to do, and I ended up doing surveying work, land surveying and construction engineering, and well, you have to have a disciplinary setup right there too. It's very similar to the military, large corporations.
Yeah.
So I would say, yes, I derived a good understanding of discipline at that time. And I carried through with the work that I had done. Later on, after I was involved in bidding jobs, I spent quite a few years at that. I got into construction safety, and I spent several years there on all kinds of construction projects. Airports, dams, tunnels, and so on.
While you were in the service, did you hear anything about what was going? Were you able to keep in touch with what was going on in the world, you know, during that time?
Yes, yes.
How did you get that?
There would be movie reels that were sent whenever you could get close to another ship. You understand? It's kind of a dangerous thing when you're refueling at sea or transferring water or mail.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were using...
Or men.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, they would be possibly transferred in a bosun's chair, which just lets you run. Let's see, what were we saying then? Well,
I mean, if you knew, if you were aware of what was going on.
Well, yes, and they brought these movies, but then you might not get one for 2 or 3 months, so you were up to date, and you never knew when you were leaving port. It was always very secret. Usually, like in old days, when the tide runs out, you go out.
And it was very secret. I mean, everything was kept a secret. Everything you did was a secret.
Yes, it was brought to everybody's attention, and the mail was, how do you call it? Censored. So you'd have to, all the mail that went off, the officers had to read the mail.
Oh.
So
was the incoming, all right, this was outgoing.
Outgoing.
Men, the mail that your men were writing home.
Yes.
Or
they were writing their families, their wives, their girlfriends,
yeah,
other members of the family.
and you had to censor them?
Yes, you did.
What sort of things did you have to take out?
Well, you'd look for things that would to give an indication of maybe a future campaign, you know, like Iwo Jima or Bastogne. In other words, the high command understands what they're giving the orders out, but they're not going to tell even the staff officers when the timing is now.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But you had to be very careful of what went on.
Well, you kind of read it without knowing what it says,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. Yeah. But oh yeah, that was done. You feel kind of I don't know, iffy for reading someone's mail, but that's somebody.
It was a peeping Tom.
Yeah. Well, you got other things to do too, you know. I mean, you don't get much satisfaction if you're doing the.
No. Well, how about incoming mail? Had that been censored?
Not that I'm aware of. No, not unless they would have some idea that there was something ongoing. You know, I mean, there were people that didn't like the United States, and so not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
No.
I'm just trying to think of some other questions I wanted to ask you. Generally, your service was good. I mean, your time in the service was good. You felt you accomplished something?
Yes, yes.
No.
I didn't advance beyond my rank because I wasn't able to. The business that I was in, I'd be doing engineering for other let's say, divisions of work, and when you're in construction, you are on a pretty long day. So I didn't pass all of my courses.
What made you decide to go into the reserves after you got through?
Well, I'll tell you, frankly, when I saw the posters for V5, which was Navy Air Corps, I intended to go in the Navy Air Corps, but in 1943, the government had enough recruits to be flyers. So I thought, well, I don't want to go in there, and I know what happened because later on I found out all these, and they're all good, young men. They couldn't all get on flight duty.
Right.
So they were ending up as mechanics. Well, I didn't want to be a mechanic. That was not my interest. So I thought, well, if I can't get into the Navy Air Corps, we'll go to the there was ROTC, there was Navy ROTC, and the V12, which was deck officer training. Okay. Yeah.
But after the war, you stayed on as a reserve
Yes,
officer.
I did.
Why?
Well, I still had an interest in getting promoted when you have enough promotion points. Okay. That was the idea there. But it didn't work out that I was able to get promoted above 02. So, but I stuck in there because I was still interested to trying to get more experience. Okay.
Yeah, that's the reason you stayed in, to get more experience in what?
Well, you never knew when. I would have expected that I would have been assigned to minesweeping.
Yeah, as a reserve.
As a reserve, that's right. This is what they did. They pulled people into their previous experience. Yeah.
But that you didn't go into the minesweeping as a reserve.
No.
After the war.
No, I didn't. No.
No.
Well, that would only been like the every week, every month, once a month, and 2 weeks during. So that wasn't a lot, but it was enough if you want to. Now my son is he's an 06 in the Army Guard because he didn't have any children, so he had a little bit extra time, and he's gotten at a pretty good level.
Yes, he's the full colonel.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. But I was just wondering what you did in the reserves after you left, because you said you stayed in the reserves for how many years?
Well, 43 to 61. 18 years.
18 years.
Yeah, well, what did that encompass? It encompassed some training, and of course you got to keep your address up all the time, which I was always doing, and you must have a quadrennial medical exam, which you must pass all the time, and you also have the opportunity to go to like Naval Institute. It's a professional magazine for the Navy. They had lectures that were given by very highly ranking officers.
On what?
World politics. Even then, like in the middle 50s, there was a lot of concern because we were at odds with Russia, and they knew then, we knew then that the Russians were building up, and that's a way where you had, as an individual, you had a way of keeping up with world news.
And got on the inside.
Yes, well, sort of, yeah.
So you enjoyed your reserve service then, too?
Yes, I did,
Yeah. And why did you leave?
Well, my time that was available for extracurricular, if you want to call, reserve, was always limited. it's not really an excuse. This is the way you work when you're in construction. When you're drilling tunnels.
You never knew where you're going to be.
Well, in a long-term sense, no. In the short term, I had, for example, I had 5 states I was checking all our jobs on, and in the east several, Midwest. They would be of a duration of maybe a year, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years, depending upon the type of work.
So then you couldn't be
I couldn't be at 2 places. That's right.
Yeah.
So I chose to stick with my employer because I'd gone too far. I may have gone too far beyond where I could be promoted.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you have to have the minimum hours and days and years.
Is there anything on your notes that you wanted to bring out that you we haven't touched on?
No, I don't think so. I was kind of recalling here. This I pulled out of the field jacket, just the regular.
Is there anything that you want to read there?
No. Well, I was trying to think. I remember when in the hurricane. Anyway, you're always hitting poor weather, but you're never hitting the ones where you have 100-mile-an-hour winds. See, and the thing that really impressed me the most was going through that hurricane. When you go in, you're getting the wind from one side because it's rotating. Then when you're in the eye, it's just a beautiful clear sky, and then you have to go out. But the captain has to know how to steer in and out. Otherwise, you roll over and you're done.
Does that have anything to do with the eye of the hurricane?
Yes, well, the eye is calm, completely calm. I mean, when you're going into it, because the weather's getting worse. And generally, you can tell by the rotation of the Earth and where you are on the Earth, which way the wind is going to be going. You see these on television, where it's like a spiral.
Right.
Okay, so when you go through it, it's calm. When you're coming out, you have the same exposure that you did going in. And they fly aircraft through there right now,
Yes.
But that's got to be dangerous too. So I was just thinking, I can remember at other times when we had bad weather and the steward mates, we had like 4 steward mates. They were either African American or Filipino. And we had a chief steward who was a black man, and his name was Mose. I remember very well. He was usually the stewards were a young man. He was a chief, so he occupied a position of importance.
Was he a member of the Navy, or was he a Navy man?
Yeah, and I can't tell you whether he was a regular or whether he was reserve. I don't know that.
Yeah. And what were you going to go on?
We were in some bad weather one time, and we almost lost a man overboard. And it wasn't really his fault. It's just lucky that he was caught. He was apparently so scared that he was going to jump over the side, and the chief steward grabbed that.
Is that right? What a lucky man he was.
Yeah.
The young man was.
Yeah. Because you'd have handrails, flexible cable. In fact, the crew put around canvas with the permission, so that from the deck up to the first rope, it would be canvas. So if one of the men slipped and fell, he wouldn't be washed overboard. And of course the dog too.
Of course the dog. He was the mascot of the whole.
Yes, he was.
And he was with you
all the time.
All the time.
If I went ashore to order parts and supplies and provisions and all that, he didn't want to go along. Or anyone that went ashore, he'd get into the shore boat. Yeah.
You mentioned the blacks in the Philippines. Were there at that time, even later after 45, were there any black people in the service with you, other than as stewards?
Well, yes, there was very few. I think the population percentage of the entire country is what, around 15%?
I have no idea.
I really don't know, but we had one or two, well, I can't remember even the rates. I can remember, I think we had electricians, and we had, these are all the different rates, gunnery, but I know for sure we had black fellows on the First Division, which would be regular deckhands. They'd be the ones that would be executing the maneuvers for sweeping. I mean, it's bulwark, handling these big cables.
I didn't know whether blacks were in the Navy at that time.
They were, but they weren't, and they were not. There weren't not very many. Okay, and I gotta believe that they were probably in there for the long haul. They weren't
going to be regular.
Yeah, they could have been regular.
Navy.
Yes, I think so. I know. And bosun mates. That's a rate that you stay in there and you'll get promoted all the way up. Really. And gunner's mates too.
But there were no officers or anybody.
There were no minority officers that I was aware of. I mean, you can't tell.
No, you can't say ever. Yeah, or any place.
Yeah, because.
Because I'm not sure that they were allowed in. That they were asked to serve. I mean, if they were allowed to serve.
Well, we had some on board ship. We didn't have many. Probably was a handful.
But they were mostly stewards and people like that.
Well, we had a couple of bosun's mates. Yeah.
Is that a high rank?
Well, if you start out with, they call them E now for enlisted and O for officer. So you could get up to E for enlisted up to a warrant bosun, which would be, and they have a chief warrant bosun.
In other words, that's like a warrant officer.
Yes, it is. Sure. Yeah.
No, I was just wondering, what the.
Well, I mean, if I were had I been on an aircraft carrier or a cruiser, one of those, then you'd have a better count of the total personnel on board.
Yeah.
Aircraft carrier now has 4,500 people.
Yeah.
So I don't. That's the best I can remember.
Did you ever get close to being on one of those big ships? But I mean, you stayed
Never
on
did.
the path.
No.
That's where.
And I would go back. I would go back to that.
You would?
Yes.
I mean, you liked it so much that you would go back to that same capacity.
Well, yeah, but I would also look out for the possibilities of advancement too. You can only spend, you should only spend a certain length of time in a particular rank or rate, and then move on up. Because you need to get variable experience. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you want to read anything from that? Was there anything else in your notes, or read from the book? And tell us about the book here and the man who wrote it.
Well, this booklet, Memoirs of a Minesweeper, that refers to the personal, not the ship. He was a minesweeper. All the hands on board were. And his name was Edgar S. Donald. He, at this time when he wrote his autobiography of service, he was a lieutenant, and then he became a lieutenant commander. And he was a very good captain. He took care of his men. And he was very experienced, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Now, let's see if we can find something here that relates. The last voyage of the Chickadee, AM 59, was planned to end in Bremerton, Washington, where she would be put in mothballs. You're familiar with those?
Yes.
You've been around.
Yeah.
In spite of this planning, she almost ended her days as a rusty hulk in 10 fathoms of water off the coast of Lower California. The Chickadee, of which I was commanding officer, was on her way to her division of 6 ships from the Panama Canal to San Pedro, California, which is the port of Los Angeles. With the following wind, now he begins to tell about the, if you want me to, I'll read a couple pages here. With the following wind and sea off our port quarter, we were rolling heavily to starboard. The motion we were experiencing was typical of small shallow draft ships such as these minesweepers. Their natural tendency to roll had been increased by changes made in the recent Navy Yard overhaul. The Navy had replaced our single 40mm Bofors with twin director control models. These were machine guns, but they fired a 40 millimeter, which is pretty good size. It's a couple inches.
Excuse me, were you trained in small arms?
Yes.
You were?
Yes. Thompson submachine guns, 45 pistol, and we also had on board 30 caliber, you know, the infantrymen's and the Grand rifle. So yes, we were.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay.
I just wanted to know about that.
And continuing on, their natural tendency, had been increased. In addition to these changes, we had to use up most of our diesel fuel, which we carried in tanks in the double bottom, the lowest part of the ship. Ships have two skins, from just above the waterline to down below the waterline. And on battleships, it used to be like 22 inches thick of wrought steel.
Oh.
Okay, so, and you also put, that's a lot of weight, that'll help keep it from rolling. And also, it's a place where you store water, okay? Not drinking water, because that was provided through, excuse me, evaporators, which were electrically. Okay, so that's where we got our fresh water.
They took the salt out of the...
Yes.
Okay, desalinization.
As the wind and sea built up during the afternoon, I began to suspect that we were headed for a storm center. Although no storm warnings had been received, I was puzzled by the very slow fall in the barometer as opposed to the change in the wind and sea. The ship had a very unpleasant motion. The seas, now about 20 feet high, would fill the stern and then skew it to the right so that it ended up about 10 degrees off course. So that's a lot, because this is like a 1,500-ton ship, not a large ship. This, in spite of the helmsman's efforts to keep the ship on the prescribed course. At about 2000, which is 8 p.m., I went down to the main deck to check some problem there. As I was turning to the bridge, I felt the ship start a roll, to which I paid little attention. Then when it should have stopped, it kept on going until the water was coming over the rail. I leaped for the nearest ladder and climbed as fast as I could with the sea nipping at my heels. When I reached the chart room, I was surprised to find that every member of the crew had on a life jacket. Normally, they wouldn't wear them unless ordered to. That last roll had done the trick. I immediately went to the bridge and spoke to the officer of the deck. "John, how much did we roll in that last big one?" He walked over to the clinometer. Do you know what that is?
No.
It's a metal arm that swings unrestricted according to how much the ship is taking.
I see. So
And you measure it from off the vertical. Okay? Okay. I knew that we would have to bring the ship into the wind to make sure she would not capsize. Since there were 5 other ships involved, I had to have permission to do this from the division commander. I called on the TBS. We have just rolled 54 degrees. I think it is hazardous to remain on this course and request permission to bring my ship into the wind. In a short time came the reply, "Permission granted." This was only half the battle. Now I must turn the ship almost 180 degrees against a 50-knot wind and 25-foot wave. The trick in this maneuver is to go fast enough to turn the ship against the force of the wind, but not fast enough to roll her over in the trough of the sea. I placed the officer of the deck on the top of the bridge where he had a good view of the surrounding sea. I told him that when a big wave had passed, he was to let me know. My reason for this was that the next 3 or 4 waves would be smaller, and hence that would be the time to turn. He soon called the captain. I think a big one just went by. I immediately gave the required orders, left standard rudder, port engine ahead 1/3, starboard ahead 2/3. As the ship began to swing to the left, I watched the gyro repeater carefully. This showed our heading at any time. Finally, I saw where we were headed halfway through our turn and would soon settle on a new course. I decided to look outside and open the door between the chart room and the bridge. looking forward through the portholes in front of the bridge, I was appalled at what I saw. The bow, normally about 20 feet above the water, was rapidly submerging. It looked like a submarine diving. As I stared, the bow continued to sink in a vertical wall of water until the deck was several feet below the surface of the water. The rapidly approaching black wall of water reflected back our red and green sidelights. Then, as I watched, fascinated, this solid wall of water struck the bridge structure. There was at once a terrible shock. Then the whole structure shuddered as the mast whipped back and forth. After that, I reduced both engines to 1/3 standard ahead. The sea soon moderated, and at daybreak we received orders to resume our original course to San Pedro. Later that morning we received a weather report indicating that our recent storm had been a baby hurricane. It had moved in from the west where there is little shipping, so no one knew of its presence until we encountered it. At San Pedro, my orders detached me from the Chickadee. The Chickadee went up to Bremerton Navy Yard to be put in mothballs and probably to be scrapped. Well, she never did go to Bremerton. We went to Portland.
You were on board when this happened?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That must have been a frightening experience.
Well, if you say you weren't scared, you're lying. That's all I can tell you. You know, and usually the Navy ships during the war, there were so many, they hoped for like a 20% of the crew would be experienced, like regulars.
Right.
And that means 80% of, you know, students like me or insurance salesmen or you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Civilians converted to seamen.
Yeah, I mean, but some, they certainly made a name.
Yeah, well, that sounds fascinating. So you were on this Chickadee for how long?
2 years, 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
We went through, and then we went back to, let's see, San Diego, and had the mothballing started on the Chickadee. So instead of possibly going to Bremerton, and then for mothballing, and that was changed to go to the South China Sea to sweep, you know, the Japanese mine. Right. We ended up in San Diego, and then I was transferred out of there to, I was out of the Navy Reserve.
What? Oh, you were out of the...
Once I fulfilled that, I left, well, I did get out of the Navy Reserve, really. I was out of active duty. That was 2.5 years on board the ship. And that was very interesting, watching the mothballing on our ship.
Imagine.
Yeah.
And they take everything off?
No, they didn't take things off. You want me to tell you about
Yes, I'd like to hear about
that. They had some kind of a chemical solution that, like a paint, but it wasn't a paint. It was used. First thing they would do would be to look at the size and the shape of the armament, the guns, 3-inch 50s or 40 millimeters or whatever, and take like masking tape and go all around this gun or whatever it was, and so it kind of rounded the corners. All right, and then they sprayed it, and as soon as this liquid came out of the spray gun, it would turn to a plastic. Although you could push your hand into it, it wouldn't break. It was a soft cover.
I think I've seen pictures, but I never realized that.
They showed after the war. They showed where some of the ships were put. And that's where the ship keepers were. They put air conditioning units in the ship and set them at a certain low level. And these ship keepers were on duty all the time now. Okay.
Oh.
And they're the ones that check.
I mean, when they're put in mothballs, but still kept up to par. They were still watched. And
they figured like whatever, you know, what is it, 30 days, 60 days. Different ships had different times that they required to get ready for full duty. Okay, so that's what happened, and then a lot of them. Did
you watch this procedure being done, or did you take part in it?
Well, I would have duties as officer of the deck, so. But as far as me physically doing it, no, the crew did it under the instructions of the officers. Yeah. I mean, we had minesweeping officer, we had you know, gunnery and fire control, which has to do with damage control. So the officers were specialized too.
To do that. But you often hear about ships being taken out of mothballs.
Yes.
And so the procedure then is reversed. I mean, you're able to get all of this material off
Well,
easily?
what happened in a lot of cases, that stuff was stripped off, and the government, the Navy, would solicit bids on these ships, and they were cut up with a propane torch. So, not all, but some of them. And some of them were, you know, they were in Bayonne, Norfolk Navy Yard, Brooklyn Navy Yard. There are a lot of places around the country where these ships were put in just
For safety,
to sleep.
you know, just
Yeah.
put 'em,
For readiness. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so then it didn't disturb any of the machinery, any of the guns, any of the, when you took it off?
Well, you've heard of cosmoline. Cosmoline is that looks like a grease, and when things like firearms are shipped, they're all coated with this cosmoline. Well, they coated certain components on board ship, whatever it would take to keep them in readiness.
Right.
Start the engines up, turn the crews, of course,
Yeah.
you know, the screws,
Screws.
and make sure that everything started to work the way it should, ready to go. If you say you're going to be ready in 60 days, you got to be ready.
So you were there doing both of those. You put them in mothballs and you were there to take in something out of mothballs.
Yes, yeah. But I didn't see a lot of that because it didn't happen for several years.
Right.
You know, after 45.
Right.
So I often thought, when I've seen Cousteau's television series on diving and everything,
Yes.
I often thought that the ship that he had, he called a Calypso,
Yes.
looked like one of
Looked like
these
one here.
sweepers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But all in all, you felt you had a good experience. You're glad you went,
Very much so.
and you felt that you accomplished.
Yeah. Well, we were married, my wife and I were married early. I wasn't out more than a couple of years. I had a year and a half of college to go.
Yes.
And there I was, 20 years old. Okay.
Yes. And when you got out?
Well, when I graduated from college, I was 20.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, start early, finish early.
Finished early, right. And had the war in between.
Well, you got to do things. You know. And I feel I was very fortunate in employment. I worked for some very reputable construction firms, and good experience. Good experience.
And good experience that you had in the Navy.
Yeah.
Carried over.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much, Bill. Is there anything else you feel that you
No,
want
I
to talk
don't
about?
think so.
Think
I
we've
just-
covered what
I can recall.
came to
favorably
talk
well.
about? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's fine, and I thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Oops. That's off now.
I'm going to turn it off.